Hello, this is Morel with Love Among the Haystacks, the audiobook Love Among the Haystacks. Here goes. The two large fields lay on a hillside facing south. Being newly cleared of hay, they were golden green and they shone almost blindingly in the sunlight. Across the hill halfway up ran a hedge high that flung its black shadow finely across the molten glow of the sward. The stack was being built just above the hedge. It was of great size, massive, but so silvery and delicately bright in tone that it seemed not to have weight. It rose, dishevelled and radiant among the steady golden-green glare of the field. A little farther back was another finished stack. The empty wagon was just passing through the gap in the hedge from the far-off corner of the bottom field, where the sward was still striped grey with windrows. The loaded wagon launched forward to climb the hill to the stack. The white dots of the haymakers showed distinctly among the hay. The two brothers were having a moment's rest, waiting for the load to come up. They stood, wiping their brows with their arms, sighing from the heat and the labour of placing the last load. The stack they rode was high, lifting them up above the hedge tops and very broad, a great slightly hollowed vessel into which the sunlight poured in, which the hot, sweet scent of hay was suffocating. Small and inefficacious the brothers looked, half submerged in the loose grey trough, lifted high up as if on an altar reared to the sun. Maurice, that's the younger one, was a handsome young fellow of 21, careless and debonair and full of vigour. His grey eyes, as he taunted his brother, were bright and baffled with a strong emotion. His swarthy face and the same peculiar smile, expectant and glad and nervous, of a young man roused for the first time in passion. "That's these," he said, as he leaned on the pommel of his fork. "That thou'd has done me one in, dunna." He smiled as he spoke, then fell again into his pleasant torment of musing. "I thought now, that knows so much," retorted Geoffrey, with a touch of a sneer. His brother had the better of him. Geoffrey was a very heavy, hulking fellow, a year older than Maurice. His blue eyes were unsteady. They glanced away quickly. His mouth was morbidly sensitive. One felt with him wince away through the whole of his great body. His inflamed self-consciousness was a disease in him. "Ah, but though I know that did," mocked Maurice. "Then went slinking off," Geoffrey winced convulsively, "thinking as that were the last night as any of us were stop here. So that lead me to sleep, though it were thy turn." He smiled himself, thinking of the result of Geoffrey's ruse. "I didn't go slinking off neither," retorted Geoffrey, in his heavy, clumsy manner, wincing at the phrase. "Didn't my father send me to fetch some coal?" Oh yeah, we know all about it. But that sees what that missed, my lad." Maurice, chuckling, threw himself on his back in the bed of hay. There was absolutely nothing in his world then, except the shallow ramparts of the stack and the blazing sky. He clenched his fists tight, threw his arms across his face, and braced his muscles again. He was evidently very much moved so acutely that it was hardly pleasant, though he still smiled. Geoffrey, standing behind him, could just see his red mouth with the young moustache like black fur curling back and showing the teeth in a smile. The elder brother leaned his chin on the pommel of his fork, looking out across the country. Far away was the faint blue heap of Nottingham. Between the country lay under a haze of heat, with here and there a flag of colliery smoke waving. But near at hand, at the foot of the hill, across the deep hedged high road, was only the silence of the old church and the castle farm among their trees. The large view only made Geoffrey more sick. He looked away, to the wagons crossing the field below him, the empty cart like a big insect moving downhill, the load coming up, rocking like a ship, the brown head of the horse ducking, the brown knees lifted and planted strenuously. Geoffrey wished it would be quick. Didn't think. Geoffrey started, coiled within himself, and looked down at the handsome lips moving in speech below the brown arms of his brother. I didn't think he'd be through with me, or that wouldn't be left me out of it, Morris said, ending with a little laugh of excited memory. Geoffrey flushed with hate, and had an impulse to set his foot on that moving, taunting mouth which was there below him. There was silence for a time. Then, in a peculiar tone of delight, Morris's voice came again, spelling out the words, as it were. Each bin klein mine hurts its rein. It's Neymar drin aus Christ, Allen. Morris chuckled, then, convulsed at a twinge of recollection, keen as pain, he twisted over, pressed himself into the hay. Can thee say thy prayers in German? Came his muffled voice. I not want, growled Geoffrey. Morris chuckled. His face was quite hidden, and in the dark he was going over and over again his last night's experiences. What about kissing her under there, sonny? He said, in a curious, uneasy tone. He read, still startled and inflamed by his first contact with love. Geoffrey's heart swelled within him, and things went dark. He could not see the landscape. And there's just a nice 2 handful of her bosom, came the low, provocative tones of Morris, who seemed to be talking to himself. The 2 brothers were both fiercely shy of women. And until this hay harvest, the whole feminine sex had been represented by their mother, and in presence of any other women they were dumb louts. Moreover, brought up by a proud mother, a stranger in the country, they held the common girls as beneath them, because beneath their mother, who spoke pure English and was very quiet. Loud-mouthed and broad-tongued the common girls were. So these 2 young men had grown up virgin, but tormented. Now and again Morris had the start of Geoffrey, and the elder brother was deeply mortified. There was a danger of his sinking into a morbid state from sheer lack of living, lack of interest. The foreign governess at the vicarage, whose garden lay beside the top field, had talked to the lads through the hedge, and had fascinated them. There was a great elder bush with its broad, creamy flowers crumbling onto the garden path and into the field. Geoffrey never smelt elderflower without starting and wincing, thinking of the strange foreign voice that had so startled him as he mowed out the skins in the hedge bottom. A baby had run through the gap, and the Fräulein, calling in German, had come brushing down the flowers in pursuit. She had started so on seeing a man standing there in the shade that for a moment she could not move. And then she had blundered into the rake which was lying by his side. Geoffrey, forgetting she was a woman when he saw her pitch forward, had picked her up carefully, asking, "Have you hurt yourself?" Then she'd broken into a laugh and answered in German, showing him her arms and knitting her brows. She was nettled rather badly. "You want a dock leaf," he said. She frowned in a puzzled fashion. "A dock leaf," she repeated. He had rubbed her arms with a green leaf, and now she had taken to Morris. She had seemed to prefer himself at first. Now she had sat with Morris in the moonlight and had let him kiss her. Geoffrey sullenly suffered, making no fight. Unconsciously, he was looking at the vicarage garden. There she was, in a golden brown dress. He took off his hat and held up his right hand in greeting to her. She, a small golden figure, waved her hand negligently from among the potato rows. He remained rested in the same posture, his hat in his left hand, his right arm upraised, thinking. He could tell by the negligence of her greeting that she was waiting for Morris. What did she think of himself? Why wouldn't she have him? Hearing the voice of the wagoner leading the load, Morris rose. Geoffrey still stood in the same way, but his face was sullen, and his upraised hand was slack with brooding. Morris faced uphill. His eyes lit up and he laughed. Geoffrey dropped his own arm, watching. "Lad," chuckled Morris, "I now knowed her." He waved his hand clumsily. In these matters, Geoffrey did better. The elder brother watched the girl. She ran to the end of the path behind the bushes, so that she was screened from the house. Then she waved her handkerchief wildly. Morris did not notice the maneuver. There was the cry of a child. The girl's figure vanished, reappeared, holding up a white childish bundle, and came down the path. There she put down her charge, sped uphill to a great ash tree, climbed quickly to a large horizontal bar that formed the fence there, and standing poised, blew kisses with both her hands in a foreign fashion that excited the brothers. Morris laughed aloud as he waved his red handkerchief. "Well, what's the danger?" shouted a mocking voice from below. Morris collapsed, blushing furiously. "Nout," he called. There was a hearty laugh from below. The load rode up, sheared with a hiss against the stack, then sank back again upon the scotches. The brothers ploughed across the mass of hay, taking the forks. Presently, a big, burly man, red and glistening, climbed to the top of the load. Then he turned round, scrutinized the hillside from under his shaggy brows. He caught sight of the girl under the ash tree. "Oh, that's who it is," he laughed. "I thought it was some such bird, but I couldn't see her." The father laughed in a hearty, Shaffian way, then began to team the load. Geoffrey, on the stack above, received his great forkfuls. and swung them over to Morris, who took them, placed them, building the stack. In the intense sunlight, the three worked in silence, knit together in a brief passion of work. The father stirred slowly for a moment, getting the hay from under his feet. Geoffrey waited, the blue tins of his fork glittering in expectation. The mass rose. His fork swung beneath it. There was a light clash of blades, and the hay was swept on to the stack, caught by Morris, who placed it judiciously. One after another, the shoulders of the three men bowed and braced themselves. All wore light blue bleach shirts that stuck close to their backs. The father moved mechanically, his thick, rounded shoulders bending and lifting duly. He worked monotonously. Geoffrey flung away his strength. His massive shoulders swept and flung the hay extravagantly. "Dost want to knock me over?" asked Morris angrily. He had to brace himself against the impact. The three men worked intensely, as if some will urged them. Morris was light and swift at the work, but he had to use his judgment. Also, when he had to place the hay along the far ends, he had some distance to carry it, so he was too slow for Geoffrey. Ordinarily, the elder would have placed the hay as far as possible where his brother wanted it. Now, however, he pitched his forkfuls into the middle of the stack. Morris strode swiftly and handsomely across the bed, but the work was too much for him. The other two men, clenched in their receive and deliver, kept up a high pitch of labour. Geoffrey still flung the hay at random. Morris was perspiring heavily with heat and exertion, and was getting worried. Now and again, Geoffrey wiped his arm across his brow mechanically, like an animal. Then he glanced with satisfaction at Morris's moiled condition and caught the next forkful. "Where dost think thou to holding it to, you fool?" panted Morris, as his brother flung a forkful out of reach. "Where I've a mind," answered Geoffrey. Morris toiled on, now very angry. He felt the sweat trickling down his body. Drops fell into his long black lashes, blinding him so that he had to stop and angrily dash his eyes clear. The veins stood out in his swarthy neck. He felt he would burst or drop if the work did not soon slacken off. He heard his father's fork dully scrape the cart bottom. "There, the last," the father panted. Geoffrey tossed the last light at random, took off his hat, and steaming in the sunshine as he wiped himself, stood complacently watching Morris struggle with clearing the bed. "Don't you think you've got your bottom corner a bit far out?" came the father's voice from below. "You'd better be drawing in now, hadn't you?" "I thought you said next load," Morris called sulkily. "Aye, all right. But isn't this bottom corner?" Morris, impatient, took no notice. Geoffrey strode over the stack and stuck his fork in the offending corner. "What, here?" he bawled in his great voice. "Aye, it's a bit loose," came the irritating voice. Geoffrey pushed his fork in the jutting corner and, leaning his weight on the handle, shoved. He thought it shook. He thrust again with all his power. The mass swayed. "What art up to, the fool?" cried Morris in a high voice. "Mind who's calling a fool," said Geoffrey, and he prepared to push again. Morris sprang across and elbowed his brother aside. On the yielding, swaying bed of hay, Geoffrey lost his foothold and fell grovelling. Morris tried the corner. "It's solid enough," he shouted angrily. "Aye, all right," came the conciliatory voice of the father. "You do get a bit of a rest now. There's such a long way to cart it," he added reflectively. Geoffrey had got to his feet. "That mind who thou'rt nudging, I can tell thee," he threatened heavily, adding as Morris continued to work, "and there's no calm him fool again, does he?" "Not till next time," sneered Morris, as he worked silently round the stack. He neared where his brother stood like a sullen statue, leaning on his forecandle, looking out over the countryside. Morris's heart quickened in its beat. He worked forward until the point of his fork caught in the leather of Geoffrey's boot, and the metal rang sharply. "Aye, they're going to shift myself," asked Morris threateningly. There was no reply from the great block. Morris lifted his upper lip like a dog. Then he put out his elbow and tried to push his brother into the stack clear of his way. "Who are they shoving?" came the deep, dangerous voice. "They," replied Morris with a sneer, and straightway the two brothers set themselves against each other like opposing bulls. Morris trying his hardest to shift Geoffrey from his footing, Geoffrey leaning all his weight in resistance. Morris, insecure in his footing, staggered a little, and Geoffrey's weight followed him. He went, slithering, over the edge of the stack. He went slithering over the edge of the stack. Do join me. Do join me for the next video of Love Among the Haystacks. Find out what's happening with the brothers. Join me, Morel Bernard, for the next video of Love Among the Haystacks. I'll see you then.